Did this last week.
Alrighty, welcome everybody. The time is 5:47 on Tuesday, January 21, 2025. I'd like to call this Finance Advisory Committee meeting to order. Our first order of business is to appoint the committee chair for the 2025-2026 two-year term. Nominations are open for the chair. Are there any nominations? Are there any other nominations? The nominations are closed. May I please have a mover and seconder for the motion that Mayor Marakis be elected as chair of the Finance Advisory Committee for a two-year term, 2025-2026. Any questions or comments? Call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. So I'll now turn the chair over to the mayor.
Okay.
And here's the index.
Next, we're going to do appointment of vice chair. Nomination. Anybody?
Nominate Councillor Kim.
Okay. You'll move that. I'll second it. Sure. All those, I guess I can second it, can't I? I know there's only three of us. Chair really can't second, but all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Land acknowledgement. Town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. A shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. A motion to approve the agenda. Harold, Michael. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. 5.1, which is receipt of the meeting minutes of October 8th. Someone like to receive that for information? Harold, second by Michael. Any questions on the minutes? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. No delegations. So our first matter for consideration, 7.1, memorandum from manager financial reporting and revenue regarding the 2024 audit planning report. We have a presentation to be provided by Maria, lead audit engagement partner, and Andrew, the audit senior manager, KPMG. Maria, welcome. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having us here today. So what I understood was that we weren't doing a formal presentation. We were just going to summarize a report briefly. Is that still what you guys want us to do?
That's good, Maria. I see Rachel's nodding her head yes. So
yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So everybody has a report, so we won't put it up on the screen, but essentially what this is the first touch point that we have with you to talk about our audit planning report. We'll go over some of the key items that make up our audit plan. And then the second meeting that we will have with you is at the end of our audit when we've completed our audit. So that would be our audit findings report meeting. And in that meeting, we will go over if there are any findings as a result of performing our audit procedures. We also have on the call Mohammed Saqib, who is going to be taking over as the senior manager for this audit engagement. Andrew will be involved, but in limited capacity. To start off, I would say that the audit approach and the audit plan have stayed consistent with prior year due to the consistency in town's operations and activities year over year. We'll highlight some of the key items that are discussed in the report for your interest. The first one would be the new accounting and auditing standards that are coming into effect for the current year. So there are three new accounting standards, PS 3400, which is revenue, 3160, which is P3s, and PSG 8, which is intangibles. We're working with management to assess the impact of these. So we will report on this as part of our audit findings report, but these are not like ARO, which is what we dealt with last year. So the impact, if any, would be very limited. The second item I wanted to quickly talk through is materiality, which is an important topic for financial statement audit. Materiality calculation is the amount that we calculate to scope our audit procedures, derive sample sizes, and also to assess any misstatements that are identified during the course of the audit. Our calculation for materiality has stayed the same year over year in terms of the benchmark that we use, which is revenue or forecasted revenues, and the percentage we use, which is 2.5%. So that stayed the same, but materiality amount is slightly different, which is 3.3 million. There's another amount which is called the audit misstatement posting threshold. That is 5% of materiality, which is about 165,000. And that's the amount above which, if there are any errors, whether they're corrected or uncorrected, we will bring them to you as part of our audit findings report. In addition to this, we've also included specialists that are involved in our audit engagement. There's only one from our side, which is to support the actuarial assessment related to employee future benefits. The report talks about different types of risks that we've included in our audit. There are two presumed fraud risks, which are management override of controls and revenue recognition. And there is detail in the report related to these two fraud risks. Both of these are required by the Canadian auditing standards, and they're considered and included in all of our audit engagements. So they're not specific to Town of Aurora. There's also an overview of some of our audit procedures for different areas of focus. I'll leave that to you for your review, but it's not a comprehensive list. That is something that I always point out. There are other things, other procedures that we perform which might not be included in this report. We've also included on page 18, we've included standard inquiries with those charged with governance. Now, we have completed these inquiries with management and your senior people in the finance team. But if there are any comments in addition to that, please feel free to reach out to us separately and we can discuss them. The only other thing I would point out is, so there are quite a few appendices that we include in these type of reports, and that's to help those charged with governance, which would be this committee as well, to keep top of mind in terms of hot topics, where the risk lies, the areas where the industry or the public sector in your case are focused on, what are the big things that are happening out there that you should be aware of and consider as part of your governance role for this organization. So with that, I'll pause. I know I rushed through some of these highlights, but I didn't want to take too much time from your meeting, but we're here for any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Harold?
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, my questions were regarding the newly effective accounting and auditing standards, which you highlighted. Thanks for that. Can you give more granular illustration of how this will impact us? The document talks about changes in revenue recognition. And I know in a previous report the other week, staff talked about revenue recognition in a different item, but you talk about identification of purchased intangibles. Can you give an illustration of what that, how that would play out and how that is impacted by the new auditing and accounting standards?
Yeah, sure. So
Maria?
let me talk about revenue first. So public sector accounting standards are a little bit weird in the sense that in IFRS, you only have one revenue standard. In accounting standards for private enterprises, you only have one revenue standard, and so on and so forth. In public sector accounting standards, we have many different standards for different types of revenue. So for example, taxation revenue has its own standard. Their user fees and charges that has its own sort of standard. Restricted revenue, which falls under obligatory, has its own standard. Now, this new standard, PS 3400, which is just going to come into effect for 24, the intention of that new standard is not to change anything for the other streams of revenue. So those other streams of revenue will continue to be recognized as they have been in the past. The intention of this new revenue standard is to address any sort of other type of miscellaneous revenue where there was not sufficient guidance available in the existing standards. The only area where we've seen applicability for this PS 3400 really has been on something like a building permit, where there was quite a bit of vagueness in terms of the existing standards or the legacy standards, call them. And different municipalities were sort of making their own interpretations of how to apply those standards to something like a building permit, where it could be a point of sale or it could be deferred and recognized later on based on a certain argument. So what this standard PS 3400 has done is it's just given that additional guidance for those type of unique situations where you have miscellaneous revenue, miscellaneous streams of revenue, and where you don't have another existing standard to provide you with the guidance. That's why the implication of this new standard is going to be very limited, because most, if not all, municipalities already have a process in place for even something like a building permit. I haven't seen anybody change the way that they were recognizing revenue even for that, based on this new standard. It just clarifies existing guidance. It's not like ARO, which was a net new standard, which in the past there was no liability recorded for asset retirement obligation, if that helps. The other standard you mentioned is PSG 8, which is intangibles. So the reason why that standard or guideline, it's actually not a standard, PSG is a public sector guideline. The reason why that was issued by the Public Sector Accounting Standard Board is because in the past, PSAS did not have a standard for intangibles. So before this guideline, it was actually excluded. If you go back to your tangible capital asset standard, it was excluded to be recognized in any sort of organization which is following public sector accounting standards. Intangibles were not allowed to be recognized, which was very different from IFRS or other accounting standards. So really, this guideline was brought into effect to provide municipalities or any other organization that is following public sector accounting standards to be able to recognize intangibles when they do have a situation when they're purchasing an intangible.
Darryl?
Does that help?
Thank you, Maria. Yes, it does. Thank you, Maria. So regarding going back to the first item, revenue recognition. So you mentioned that it's really just more the miscellaneous items. So if we were to go back using this new standard in prior years, you wouldn't see a huge significant change in prior statements then. Is that correct?
Maria?
Correct, yes.
Darryl?
In terms of the climate risks, and I forgot what it was called, but when we take into consideration the climate or the green kind of accounting rules, would that cause a further change in our audited financial statements if that's incorporated? And given the temperature these days with all the major banks, bowing out of the net zero initiative and so forth, do you envision that these green initiatives in accounting to continue in the way it's going?
Maria?
So great question. There are a few things that you've asked there. So the first question is what I'm understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong. The first is, does it apply to our financial statements in terms of any reporting requirements relating to whether it's climate change or any climate initiatives or goals or any net zero promises, anything like that? So there's no mandatory requirement. At this stage, there's nothing mandated for anybody in Canada that you have to report on these. There is some additional requirement that is coming down the pipeline, maybe in a year or so, that public sector entities in Canada would be required to report something. But at this stage, we're not there yet. Public companies, meaning listed companies who are listed on the stock exchange, have some reporting requirements, but even that is a little bit lax. Is it coming down the pipeline in the coming years? Absolutely. It's not going to go away. ESG is here to stay. You know, how quickly it becomes as big as we thought it would become 2 years ago, that is up for speculation. It might take longer based on other economic issues that we're dealing with globally, including wars and general economic environment that we're currently in. ESG seems to fall down on the priority list, but it is here to stay, is our assessment. What I have seen other municipalities do is some municipalities, including Mississauga and Toronto, they've started including some disclosure in their financial statements, which is not required. Again, it's voluntary disclosure related to some sort of a goal that they have or a target that they have for their emission reductions or their natural assets or something to that effect. So it is starting to happen, but there's no requirement at this stage. Thank
you. And my last comment and question is, I find that with audits, the biggest source of risk is in the process and procedures of an organization. And I think you highlighted a couple of the risks when you guys went through the walkthrough with our internal teams. My question to you is going to be, what were some of the identified areas where that might have been problematic for your team? But I think you mentioned management overrides and one other item. I forgot what that was, but are those the two only things that you uncovered in your process walkthroughs with the town?
Yeah.
So just a clarification. So those are not findings. So management override of controls and fraud risk from revenue recognition, those are considerations as part of our audit plan that were required based on our auditing standards. We're required to include them. Anytime we're auditing any entity, we're required to consider the risk of fraud from either management override or revenue recognition. That does not mean that there is fraud happening or there is a lack of control in that organization. So I just wanted to clarify that. We haven't completed the audit for this year, but based on our experience last year, we did not identify any findings relating to management override or revenue recognition. We didn't have any such finding in terms of anything, which was untoward or any red flags of that nature. We did not identify them. Having said that, we don't test controls as part of our audit. Our audit is substantive in nature. We don't take a controls-based approach for our audit engagements in the public sector, and that's consistent with all primarily public sector in Ontario. And if you ask me why don't we take a controls-based approach, well, it's because the requirements in the auditing standards, if we were to try and take a controls-based approach, the bar for those controls is very, very high. And that's why that controls-based approach is limited to our publicly listed entities only. So typically for public sector entities, including municipalities, government controlled entities, or not-for-profit organizations, we do not take a controls-based approach because the controls that are in place are not at that level of maturity which would allow for us to be able to complete our audit based on a control-based approach. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yes, it
in the
does.
past,
Thank
we
you.
haven't found anything at the town.
Thank you, Maria.
No problem.
No. No. Thanks, Maria.
Okay, no problem.
Motion to receive. Michael, Harold, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. There was a second part to that, right? I apologize. Yes, there was a second part to that. We referred to staff for consideration of further action as appropriate. Okay. Just add that, friendly, okay. All right. All right, thank you, Maria.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
7.2, this one is line by line budget review, operational services. Sure.
So what you have in front of you tonight has been updated. We were supposed to be before you, late fall last year. So this is actually a comparison between the 2023 actuals and the last forecast for 2024, which would have been in October. We don't have the final numbers for 2024 just because year end hasn't wrapped up. So what you're seeing here is the 2024 October forecast in comparison to the 2023 actuals. You know, there's a lot of external factors that affect operations, certainly, and those either they're weather related, they're unexpected anomalies that pop up. Things this year that are driving some of the differences in union contracts and salaries. We had some decrease in some weather events. Prices and contracts have increased, and I think looking forward to 2025 and the impacts that we may see. We saw them previously in the when we had tariffs put on Canada. We saw significant increases in materials and parts, specifically to fleet, because we're so closely tied. So I think we can anticipate if those tariffs go on in 2025 or shortly, that we'll see an increase in those sectors and budgets and cause us some overtures in 2025. But other than that, we're open to take any questions on any of those lines. And if you need any further explanation, Luigi and Matt are here to help provide some of that.
Michael, Harold? Anybody? Harold, go ahead.
Just, there's a lot of lines, so I'm not gonna go into every single line, but just in general, I'll use Arc Electrical as an example. You know, when we have an actual that's actual spending greater than budgeted, I would imagine that would be in the capital budget. How does that impact the asset management plan? I mean, I would imagine that it just brings things forward a year or two and really would have no impact. But just to get clarification, when we go over budget by you know, some equipment not working properly, we have to replace it. How does that impact our AMP?
Sarah?
So in general, I mean, this is our operating, so it's for the maintenance of these pieces of equipment or assets within Parks, fleet, roads. And if something arises, there's usually surplus in it, or we reach out to finance if there isn't sufficient funding. And if I understand correctly, that then comes out of at year end.
Yeah, we look at the overall
any overall
surplus. for the
surplus.
organization.
Yeah, and then if some particular asset needs replacing, if there is a piece of equipment that, for instance, maybe there's a serious breakdown and it warrants a replacement, those decisions are made and then those are backed out of the AMP. And I don't think those costs then are reflected in there. Are they transferred over into the AMP? I'm not sure.
If a piece of equipment did need replacing, so we're replacing an asset, we would likely have to come forward with a report to create a project to be able to do that replacement, depending on the value of the equipment.
That's it?
Michael?
On page 7, I just want to get some clarification. Most of the responses are fairly clear. They point to things 2024, but there's 2 with regards to 2023 in here. So I guess I'll go to operating materials, which is in a second. Okay. It says higher salt purchases than budgeted in 2023 being identified, but when I look at actuals versus budget, it seems to be less. I was just confused by the rationale. Because in 2023, it looks like we spent 500,000. 2024, we're forecasting to spend 440, but the explanation is higher salt purchases than budget in 2023. So as you were just saying that's
Higher compared to the 23 budget.
yes, but it's what our actuals.
Yeah, so I think the comment what it relates to is in 2023, the amount of spending in salt was much higher than anticipated. So it was way above what the normal budget would be. And that's why you're seeing it coming back down to a lower level after that.
Okay, so I guess the same explanation, because 2022 is even higher than 2023.
Correct,
Right.
and that's related to the number of salt events,
Winter events.
the winter events that we would have had.
Yeah.
In those years.
So do we feel that 444 is the average then? Because, I'm just looking at historic, 2021 is 432, 2022 is 550, 500. And so if we look at what, I guess we're talking about what the average budget is it 450, we think?
Yeah, it is on average around there.
Okay.
Similar to fuel in fleet. I mean, we take the average over the number of years because it's highly volatile, it's up and down, and we take the average and that's what we try to transpose across it.
Sure, that looks general. And I guess that's the same explanation, really, first one, which talked about salaries and then talked about fewer weather events in 2023. But, I mean, obviously this one goes up and down based on
Correct.
what kind of winter we have.
Yeah, and the
I guess it's
amount of
just to get a
overtime
sense of
spent.
what the norm is and what we're budgeting for.
Yeah, and also, I mean, especially with salaries, I mean, it depends on what time of day the event occurs too. I mean, if it's a evening event, then it's overtime. If it's a daytime event, then it's just normal, regular salary time. So those things are just external factors that are variable year to year.
So when we set the budget, we're looking at, I guess, a 3 or 5 year horizon and we're trying to average it out. So that's
Correct.
about 280 or 300.
Correct.
Great, thanks.
Anything else? No?
Thanks. For you, in terms of on the insurance line, I noticed that it was 30% increase. Could you just provide some context or just, is that where insurance trends are going?
Yeah, so I'll address that. So the insurance, that's negotiated with our legal services team. So they work directly with the insurance providers. And they're looking at the overall cost for the entire corporation. So there may be some areas that you go up and down. We have noticed in the past couple of years, it's been a bit more of a hard insurance market. There have been some sustained increases, but then if you look at some of the big insured losses that have happened across the country in the last few years, it's understandable.
Given all these events that are happening, not just in the States, but in Canada. So in Ontario, when we don't have those dramatic events as Maritimes or Quebec, at least I don't think so. Will it still impact our rates here in Ontario? If it's consistent and less volatile?
Through Mr. Mayor, so the insurance companies do operate across the country, and there are only a couple of providers that actually work with municipalities. So it's a bit of a smaller market, and they work with municipalities across the nation.
Carol?
Okay, thank you.
Someone want to put a motion? Carol, Michael? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you, guys. You guys are good. Next, we have our Finance Advisory Committee work plan for 2025. Richard.
So each year we try to put together a plan for what we'll review at Finance Advisory Committee over the course of the year. So we do recognize some things do change from month to month, but overall, this is what we're planning for the rest of this year. And it should just give the committee an idea of what is to come, or if there's anything else you're looking for, you can let us know and we can fit that in.
But I guess I have a little bit on what Ms. Steenkamp said in terms of, the economic outlook, tariffs, driving up prices with regards to maybe some capital projects or materials and goods. I just wonder if it's worthwhile at some point, perhaps bring something back to FAC to say what the potential, risk or impact may or may not be as we see through budget. Because I think one of the challenges we always have is that, we get interim statements, but we're usually 2 to 3 months behind. And so we're always acting in, after the fact, so to speak. But maybe we can do some gauging with maybe the economic outlook for the remainder of this year or term or whatever with respect to those things, and bring something forward to have some discussion and see whether or not there needs to be any proactive.
So I think you're probably reading my mind.
Perfect, great.
I'm thinking what's going to happen is after we do hear what these tariffs may or may not include, or when they do happen, we'll start taking a look at that and bring something back, whether it be here or even at council.
Yep, no, I think that was
Just
my only
again-
thought when I looked at the work plan was, given that little bit of uncertainty, maybe there's value in having a conversation about that.
Harold?
Yeah, I noticed that the Town Square partnership on the budget is not here. Is it the team's plan to just put out a report to council in general, or would it be good to have it reviewed by FAC first, or just like an update?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe there's a report planned for February Committee of the Whole, which will summarize the opening of Aurora Town Square and the financial information on the project.
For you, Mr. Mayor, like later in the year when some real key KPIs come to the fore with, attendance, revenue figures for ACC, and the new building, like, could we have that later in the year come to back?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we can follow up with Ms. McDougall and have something come forward.
Yeah, I was just thinking perhaps it'd be just nicer to kind of, if you have anything unexpected, kind of smooth it over here before it goes to council.
Anything else?
No.
Motion? Michael, Harold? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. New business? Michael? Harold?
Yeah, just a question on, a couple months ago before the break, you had mentioned about the one JIP, and we have a new bigger municipality that's going to be adding their assets that will reduce every member's costs, and we might even have a seat at the table and on the board, perhaps, or how is that?
Rachel?
So what's happening with the WANJIB is there are a number of municipalities have actually joined since the fall. I can send you a comprehensive list. The one really large one that did join was the region of Durham. So they have joined the JIB recently. And there's a few other smaller ones, I believe, including Clarington and some other smaller municipalities. As for the WANJIB, it's not that board, but I have joined the board for the One Investment Fund, which is the custodian and oversees the one JIP. So I'm going to be involved in that starting this year.
Harold?
3, are you looking forward to it?
Very much.
That's it.
So? Still nothing? Okay. All right, motion to adjourn. Harold, Michael, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries.